Today's webinar is sponsored by UMBC's Online Graduate Program in Instructional Systems Development. Now here's the exciting part that you've all been waiting for, the exciting administrative announcements. If you have any difficulties, such as audio, please call the GoToWebinar support line at 1-800-263-6317. If you're having trouble hearing audio, please log off and then log back in. That usually solves 99% of the problems. I strongly advise you to close any other web browsers or software applications, since this may impact the quality of the webinar for you. You will have the ability to ask questions using the question function. We will also give you the ability to use the chat function as well. We have a large number of people online, so with so many people online, we'll do our best to answer your questions, but it's possible we may not get to every single question. Additionally, so our presenter doesn't get sidetracked, we will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. Joe might stop periodically and answer some questions as well. The webinar is being recorded. We will email you the link as soon as the video is posted. Additionally, Joe's slides will be available. So let me introduce Joe. Joe Ganci is CEO of Dazzle Technologies, a multimedia e-learning company outside Washington, D.C. Joe has been involved in every aspect of e-learning development since 1983. He has taught classes and seminars at leading universities and many government facilities. Mr. Ganci is also a published author, having written several books and articles about e-learning, and is widely considered a guru for his expertise in e-learning development. His approach to innovative use has caused many to rethink how they are designing and developing their e-learning to implement new and better tools. Mr. Ganci holds a computer science degree from Brigham Young University. So Joe, I'm going to hand you over the presenting wand.
Very good. Okay, show my screen. And hopefully everything is hunky-dory now. You're seeing everything correctly, right?
Let's see. Yes, I see you. So I will be quiet and let you take it from here.
Okay, and you see the full screen option, I hope.
I do, yes.
Very good. Okay, well, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. You may be a little confused because Greg just said I'm the president of Dazzle Technologies Corp, but on the screen you're seeing eLearning Joe. That's because very recently I made a change and decided to close down my Dazzle Tech shop after several years of that, and because I'm doing a lot more training now and such, I decided to change my name to eLearning Joe. So now I am eLearning Joe LLC, and if you are interested in knowing more, you can certainly contact me after. Okay, so what we're going to do today is go pretty rapidly through what I believe are the top 10 blunders in developing e-learning. Now, I have taught this session a couple of times before, actually a few times before at different conferences, and I always ask at the end and during as well if there are other blunders that you've come across that you find yourself encountering often that are not listed here. And that's perfectly fine because literally there are many more than 10 blunders that are possible, and in some cases you're going to find that certain blunders are more common in your area. Well, that's fine. I'd love to hear from you if that's the case, and let me know what kinds of things that you're encountering as well. So let's talk about right away blunder number 1, and the biggest one is for me is skipping steps. Now, you probably have heard the ADDIE process, the analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation. This is sort of the tried and true approach that not everybody believes in. We'll touch on that too, but that is a process that sort of is a logical series of steps that doesn't necessarily always result in the best results. Okay, fine, but in any situation, you're going to always want to have a series of steps to follow. Whether it's the ADDIE process or a different process, you definitely want to have some series of steps, because if you don't, you're not prepared to encounter problems along the way. So just as when you're building a house, you don't just start building it without planning in advance and doing a lot of legwork first. The same is true for any encounter, any endeavor, including that of creating e-learning. In fact, e-learning is fraught, I tell you, with potential issues that can come up to bite you if you're not careful. All right, so you've heard of the ADDIE model. That's fine, but hey, we don't use the ISD model. You're saying we use rapid prototyping. We use a different model. Fine, but you still have to perform the steps along the way. How much preparation is really required? Well, you see, just and the end result is just a little bit of training, in essence, but all that extra work that had to be done to achieve that is well hidden. So it's just like, writing a book, I suppose. The book is something you can read in a couple of days, but it might have taken the author months to write that book, maybe longer. And in our case, it's certainly true as well. In fact, in our case, it's even more true because we have so many hands in the, helping out. We have so many different disciplines in our field. So the big question then becomes, okay, if we're skipping steps, we really don't know what we're going to encounter. It's just like going on vacation and not being told whether you're going to the beach or to a ski resort. You really need to know in advance so you can prepare for that ahead of time. And we'll talk specifically about a couple of those steps in just a moment. The design stage is often rushed as well. Okay, so the analysis phase is often rushed, the design stage is often rushed, and then in the end, what we end up with is development time that it was supposed to take X amount, but suddenly is taking X times 5 amount because there's so many unanswered questions along the way. So we'll be touching upon each of these. The blunder number 1, skipping steps, is generalized. We'll be talking about some of these steps along the way too. Quality assurance is a biggie that is often mismanaged. It's often not dealt with correctly. In fact, sometimes it's just completely ignored. And what you end up with then is, of course, a result that is fraught with errors. Patricia's asking me if I can flash that iceberg graphic again. I suppose she wants to do a screen grab. That's okay. You're going to get a copy of this if you want, but there it is. Okay. If you want to take a quick look at that, you said flash it, so that means just, what, half a second? Well, okay, I left it up longer than that, but that's okay. All right, so yes, analysis, design, development, and evaluation. These are all elements that are often mismanaged and, in fact, often skipped along the way. The development part, of course, is never skipped because, heck, we have to develop something to show. And so we're talking about development as in essence, the programming side, the part where you're using an authoring tool to create something. And people often just jump right in and start creating stuff without really thinking it in advance. As an example, I worked with a government agency several years ago, and they were to create a Spanish language course. What did they do? They flew down to some Spanish-speaking countries in Central America and started filming everything in sight. And then, of course, after the fact, they were only able to use maybe 0.5% of all the video footage they had taken. This was back when video footage was more expensive also. Why not have planned it better in advance as to what exactly you wanted to record and then proceed just to record those things? So again, if you're not going to plan correctly, you're going to also waste a lot of time and money. Starting in the wrong step is a biggie too. Now, the first thing you want to do, of course, is to look at making sure that there are assumptions put into place. Assumptions like, well, what are the objectives here? We're not going to assume objectives. We want to know what those are. But then the assumptions like, how long will this be? How much interactivity is going to be in this thing? What kinds of interactions? What kind of media? Is it going to be video? Is it going to be audio, etc.? All of these questions should be answered at the beginning, because if you don't make the proper assumptions, again, what you may think is beautiful and wonderful, the end your audience, your learners, may think is the biggest piece of crap they ever saw, and vice versa. You may think that what you're delivering is not that great, and then you're finding out that people are saying, wow, this was fantastic. So again, you want to set expectations, and you have to know how to meet those, not overestimate or underestimate either. So you want to know the audience and its needs. Who is the audience? If you don't know who the audience is, you're going to make a huge mistake. To that end, you want to know what is the primary language of your audience, and are there secondary languages that have to be accommodated? What is their education level? Because if they're PhDs, you don't want to be delivering 8th grade English, but if they're a lot of English as a second language in your audience, or perhaps people who have just graduated high school, then definitely you want to lower the bar a little bit so that they're not being overwhelmed with verbiage that they may not understand. Where are they located? Are they spread throughout the world? Are they spread throughout the country? Are they going to be able to access the learning in one fell swoop, or are they going to have to break it up as they deal with their other work requirements? All of these things are a big step. Now, quick story here. Again, several years ago, I started a user group in my area here in Washington, D.C. And at that first meeting, we had about 22, 23 people show up. And 6 of them were from an oil company whose headquarters is near here. Or at least their Washington, D.C. headquarters is near here. And that was a Saturday morning. The following Tuesday, I got a call from one of their team members, in fact, the team leader, the boss, and he said, "Hey, Joe, our chief developer here is being deported because we are in a hiring freeze and we can no longer sponsor foreign nationals. We love the guy, but he can't stay." So at the time, I went in there, and at the time, I was not working for myself. This was back in the 90s. I worked for another company. We ended up sponsoring the guy and contracting him back to the oil company, which made them very happy because they loved the guy. He's still a good friend of mine, by the way. He still lives here, and he's married and has 3 kids. But so that's why he's here and not in the Philippines. But at the same time, they brought me in to help out on that project. This was midway through a 2-year process, 2-year project. So they already had done their analysis, right? They already had done a lot of their design. Now we're full swing into development halfway through. And at the end of that 2-year process, and remember, I was brought in halfway through that. At the end of that 2-year process, we were so proud of the e-learning that we had accomplished, only to have it summarily rejected by the refinery workers for whom it was intended. Why? Because initially they never had asked what they really needed. What did the audience need? And because they didn't ask that, they found out that what they had developed was not something the audience needed at all. And in fact, had they asked, they would have been told what they needed to learn. And because of that, $1 million and 2 years worth of effort with a large team of people was wasted, shut down, that whole department, and that was the end of that. So again, it's a really sad thing, but that's how it works. You have to know the strengths and weaknesses of e-learning. You certainly don't want to create an e-learning course perhaps for conversational German, where you're working with other people all the time. You can more and more now with social networking, of course, but traditionally it's not something you'd want to really do. Do you want to teach accounting 101 in the classroom? Well, maybe, maybe not. The thing is that e-learning is best and most easiest applied for those 101, 101, 102, 201, 202 type of courses from college, for instance. But when you get to the 300 level, now you're needing a lot more hands-on, a lot more face-to-face with others as well. So you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of e-learning. You want to make sure all your design guides and templates and models are in place before you go willy-nilly into developing as well. You want to set the right expectations. You want to make sure that they know what's to be expected. Is this going to need to work in a browser but also on a mobile device? And if so, is it an iPad or is it mobile phones as well? You need to know all the expectations of what you're building ahead of time. You want to have objectives that are testable, so you use Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy gives you those verbs and categories that help you to build objectives that are testable. And if you don't, then if you have silly objectives like the learner will know how to jump rope, well, how do you test that? Well, you have them jump rope, right? Well, then the learner will demonstrate how to jump rope. Well, that's a testable thing. The learner will know how is not testable. So you want to choose the verbs that will truly demonstrate that the learner knows what he or she has learned. And that's where you want to make sure that the verbs are correctly in place. So when you're setting the right objectives, hello, my PowerPoint is acting a little strange. Okay, here we go. You want to have you have 2 kinds of objectives, right? You have terminal and you have enabling. Terminal is your global objective, enabling is your supporting objectives, and as such, a terminal example like the learner will know how to write a proper business letter, not so good. Enabling objective, the learner will know how to write a proper salutation, not so good, because in actuality the word no is not very testable. There's a question from Simone, how do you feel about e-learning intended to change attitudes? I need to get a little more from you, Simone, regarding what exactly you mean by changing attitudes, because of course any e-learning is supposed to increase productivity and as such change attitudes because people are happier on the job, they know what they're doing, and so on. So give me a little more information or write me privately and I'll be happy to answer that too. Linda is asking, can we go back to the Bloom's taxonomy? Okay, real quick. I'll go back there. It's good to see you, Linda, by the way. I didn't know you were here. I know Linda. She was in a class of mine. Yes, well, the colors are just for showing, for instance, these are the categories that we start with. Now, we start with knowledge. Knowledge is the base point, and I'm actually going to talk about these just a little bit more in a second. But the knowledge, comprehension, going up to application, all the way to evaluation, you get more and more higher order types of learning. So knowledge is your base learning method. Now, from there, then you get to the verbs that you can use. And then again, what kinds of media might you put together to accomplish those different objectives? Okay, so yes, and there, if you look at Bloom's taxonomy online, you'll find lots of different charts and lots of different approaches to explaining all that to you. So yes, these are your 6 categories here. I'm not going to spend too much time on them. But real quickly, your knowledge keywords, things that you're wanting to make sure that this is learning some data, define and identify, list, name, recall, etc. These are all words that are usable when you're just trying to teach people facts. On the other hand, if you're trying to get to comprehension level, now you're starting to use verbs that are even more testable, like picking something or explaining something, etc. When you get to and there's more. When you get to analysis, it's even higher order learning, so verbs that are things like criticize and conclude and diagram. When you get up to evaluate synthesis, you're having even higher, but notice there's fewer now because these are things like preparing and planning and modifying. The stuff that we're supposed to be doing at the very beginning of everything too. Evaluation, which is your highest order, appraising, choosing, estimating, judging. You can see how much more work it is at this level to accomplish a task. How do you propose to use these verbs with people who only have a mouse and a keyboard to provide the accomplished objective? Well, absolutely. Well, I assume you're talking about the higher order ones. Without getting too much into detail, Larry, I would say that the best thing to do is to always consider, in the very best way possible, setting up case-based scenarios. Because using case-based scenarios, you can accomplish these higher orders, and you really don't need much more than a mouse and a keyboard. So if you want more information on that, I have examples of that, and just email me and we'll talk further, okay? All right, so going back to our example, for a terminal objective, the learner will demonstrate how to write a proper business letter. Certainly that's testable. The learner will demonstrate how to write a proper salutation, also good and testable as well. All right, so number 4, not estimating work correctly. We mentioned this earlier. Well, think about this for a second, okay? If you go see a movie, a Hollywood movie, a movie that probably costs millions of dollars, some cases now, what was it, Avatar cost something like $500 million. I forget exactly the amount there, but it's the most expensive movie ever made. Was it a great movie? Was it a movie of, that will stand the test of time? Well, maybe not. Okay, so the point is that even a very, very, very expensive movie can end up being a dud, right? And on the other hand, a movie that's very cheaply made can sometimes be very successful. Who remembers the Blair Witch Project? What was it, $100,000 or something like that, or even less? Well, no, I think it was like $30,000 to make that movie, and it had huge success, right? So when you're talking about movies, it's pretty crazy how often people just assume that movies cost a lot of money because that's what they hear, and they kind of accept the fact that there's sometimes going to be issues, right? There's going to be issues regarding continuity errors. I was watching a TV program the other day where someone was hiding in a closet, and she was dressed up as Bo Peep because of a costume party, so she had one of those long, what do you call those things, staffs that she was holding in her hand, that kind of has a curve at the top. And they had 2 camera angles, and one camera angle had the staff pointing to the left, and the other camera angle had it pointing to the right. Oops, that's one of those things that is called a continuity error. When I first saw Star Wars, 1977, it was months after the movie came out. I was invited to go see it by a girl on campus, and I liked her, and she liked me. And so she said, "You want to go see this movie?" And I said, "Which one?" She goes, "Star Wars." I said, "I haven't seen it yet." And she said, "Oh my gosh, you got to see this movie. So meet me in front of the theater." When I got there, I didn't find her, and then I realized it was because she was dressed up as Princess Leia, and she invited me in and to the movie theater. And when we sat down, to watch the movie, and the lights got low. She turned to me and whispered seductively into my ear, "I have seen this movie 57 times." Wow. Well, in that first time, that first viewing of Star Wars, she pointed out all the errors in the movie, all the different parts that she had noticed after multiple viewings. So, I mean, in any movie, you're going to find issues like that. So if that's the case with a movie, and it takes so much time and so much money, what about in e-learning? Well, e-learning, of course, can be even more fraught with errors and have to cost time and money. Why? Because it's not only a linear movie. When you're watching a movie, everybody sees the same movie from start to finish. But with e-learning, hopefully, if you're doing it right, you're not giving them a linear experience. You're giving them an experience that is, in fact, individualized for each person, a case-based scenario experience, one that allows them to branch and allows experts to fly through material and prove what they know, but allows novices to feel as if their hand is being held and that they are being guided along the way. So very good. Let's see. A couple of more questions have popped in. The learner will identify the proper elements of a business letter. Good objectives should drill down to specific items, in my humble opinion. I agree. That's good. That's good, Krista. Let's see. Time on task is now charted for e-learning task. I will email that to you. Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate that. And then there was one more from Krista. No, from Lynn. Dr. Reif, is that chart for you? Oh, that was to Dr. Reif. Okay. Objectives do need to be measurable. Okay, you're talking amongst yourselves. All right, I'll be quiet now. That's good. So not estimating the work correctly is a very, very common blunder because we tend to be eternal optimists. We tend to think it's going to be easy and fast, and in fact, there's a series of steps around right now that I've seen over and over, where the first step is utter enthusiasm, and then the second is disillusionment, and so on until the last one is something like search for the guilty and and punish the innocent. It's all tongue-in-cheek, of course, and luckily, because I've done this e-learning now thing for 30 years, I kind of know what I'm doing. I kind of know how to solve. I kind of know how to avoid these kinds of issues. But if you don't estimate your work correctly and you tend to underestimate the amount of time, it can really come back to haunt you. So quality assurance is part of that effort as well, of course. When you're thinking about the movies and how often they are messed up and they are so much more expensive and so much more time-consuming to create, whereas e-learning is considered something that you should be able to just throw out overnight, right? Well, no, you will lose face if you allow a lot of bugs and such to be in your e-learning. And in fact, in some situations, a missing period, a missing comma, a missing colon can, be really, really evident. In other cases, maybe not so much, but you really want to make sure that every T is crossed, every I is dotted, and you have done thorough check over and over and over. Excellent question from Robin about often we are forced to adhere to unrealistic deadlines to get the course completed, which means we have to give up a lot of the quality. How do you still design a fairly decent course when you're told you only have 40 hours, so you know it will take 80 to do it right? Well, you just don't sleep, that's all. Wait, no, I'm sorry, that's not the right answer. Okay, and this is a situation I face all the time as well. What I have found is that you can often get away with a couple of approaches that don't always work, but this is what I try first. I try to say, look, the quality is going to suffer here. It's not going to be good. So let me suggest this, and I will suggest that we pare back the objectives and the learning, because quality has to trump quantity. And as such, you often find that when there's a big deadline to meet, and there's a big, for instance, there could be an event that someone wants to show this at, whatever. I often find that it's a question of showing something that's high quality is better than the quantity. So we'll say, okay, which is like the most important piece of this that you really want to show at that event? If it's something that's going to be deployed to thousands of people, and you're told that, yes, oh yes, we'd like to have you build this e-learning for us, and oh yes, the deployment is going to be next week, then there's nothing you can do. And at that point, you can say, well, here's a PowerPoint, because that's all you can do. But if you have any chance of saying, let's pare back the objective, let's pare back the material to the important essentials for this, then we can follow up with the rest. I find that often does work. And if you want to discuss that further, again, email me. We can talk more about that because I have other ideas too. Money, money is a biggie again. Movie budgets cost a ton of money, and it takes a lot of money. It doesn't take this much money, but sometimes it takes more money than people expect. I had a situation where I was teaching at a session. I was asked to teach a session down at a university in North Carolina, and after the session, I had a professor come up to me, and she asked me if I could cost out an e-learning project for her. And so I said, sure, and I asked her a bunch of questions, which I always have to do. Obviously, if you don't know what you're going to be building, you can't give out a price. So I asked a bunch of questions, and I said, you know, what you're asking for is not really a big deal. It's probably 2 to 4 weeks worth of work. It's probably about a $6,000 project. And her jaw dropped, and she basically called me a thief. And she was saying, that's outrageous. And I said, well, how do you figure that? She said, she says, that's insane. And I said, well, how much do you think it would cost? And she says, well, I thought it would be like $300. And I said, 300? How do you figure that? That might get you a couple of meetings. She said, well, that's how much Microsoft Word cost me, and it's so much more powerful than what I'm asking you to do. So then I had to explain to her, you know, well, there's a big difference between a custom e-learning project made specifically just for one person, you, versus something that you invest a lot of money in and then sell to millions of people. Well, okay, so there's yeah, exactly, Luana. Good to see you too. That $300 quote, honest to goodness, that was exactly what she thought it was going to cost to build what she wanted to build, and that is just insane. So, all right, money. Not estimating the work correctly means that you also have the right people in place. They have to know what they're doing. That means you have to have analysts, you have designers, and artists, and animators, and developers. Not in every case do you need animators. Not in every case do you need media specialists. But when you do, you do. And you can't simply ignore the fact that you need someone who knows how to do proper video if you're really going to use video in your course. If you're not going to use video, then that's something you don't have to worry about. Serena, you're asking what software do I think is best for e-learning. That's sort of like asking me what car do I think is best, or you know, what kind of house do I think is best. It really does depend a lot on needs. I have a whole other presentation that covers all the major authoring tools, and also what is the reason to choose one over the other. Okay, and that's a separate discussion that takes a good long time. But I'm happy to send that to you guys if you want it. Just email me and I'll send that to you. The biggest ones out there. I wrote the research paper for the eLearning Guild, which is an organization you should be aware of if you're not. eLearningGuild.com is they have a lot of free resources, and there's a ton more that you get for $100 a year, I think. But they had me write a research paper based on a survey they did 2 years ago, and at the time, Adobe Captivate was the #1 tool out there, and it was being used by 77% of the market. Another huge tool was Articulate Presenter, which was being used by over 50% of the market. So what does that tell you? That tells you that both are being used by a lot of companies. The truth is that there's no one tool that fits every need. Every tool has its strengths and weaknesses, and so for companies and organizations that do diverse type of learning, they may absolutely need more than one tool in-house. Some things are okay done with a presenter, a PowerPoint add-in tool like Adobe Presenter, Articulate Presenter, and so on, but others really need a more powerful tool. This year, it is, I just finished the new research paper, and it's going to be published next month. Last year, Articulate Storyline was released, and that was in May of last year. And now we find that the Adobe Captivate has fallen from 77% to way down to about 75%. So not much. But of course, Storyline has also become quite popular. So again, it's a question of more than one tool being used. Krista wrote that she has used Captivate since it was called RoboDemo, probably a good 10 years ago or more, and she's never felt the need to go somewhere else. It is a good tool, a very good tool. I'm quite the I'm quite the expert in that tool. I teach Captivate all the time, almost, well, a lot, 2 or 3 times a month. And so, yes, it is a very powerful tool. I also have a table, an 8-page table I've just finished completing, or about to today, that compares Storyline and Captivate in detail, feature by feature, and I'm happy to send that out to anybody who wants that too. So again, email me and I'll send that to you. If I don't respond immediately, just know that I'm a little busy this week, but I will get to you in the next few days. Okay, very good. So a lot of chatter right now about, hey, is Articulate Studio 13 out now? Have you seen that, Linda? Is it published? Because I didn't see it on the website yet. I need to know because I've reviewed. There we go. Not yet, but in a few more weeks. Okay. I've been hearing that for a few months now, but I really do believe it's going to happen soon because every vendor wants to get their tool out before a major conference, and the eLearning Guild's DevLearn conference is coming up October 21st. So I'm guessing it's going to be out by then. Okay, so let's keep going. The comments are going way too fast now, so I'm going to be asking Greg and company to take a look and let me know about any that are really important. And if you don't get your question answered, please email me. I will attempt to answer your question as soon as possible. Okay, so not estimating work correctly. Let's keep going. Choosing the wrong team members we mentioned as well. We have the analysts and we have designers, etc., and each one has his strengths and weaknesses. And if a good artist, for instance, goes overboard and tries to create the most beautiful artwork in the world for something that should be rather simple in an e-learning course, well, that's because that artist wants to be proud of his or her work. And so as such, they're going to go for it unless they're told otherwise. So you have to know how to give proper direction, right? A good developer has to know how to develop what the designer is asking without making too many assumptions that the designer may have forgotten to mention. An evaluator knows it's okay to, it's not okay to overlook items, that they have to be nitpicky, they have to know how to keep to a schedule, they have to know how to write evaluation results in a way that they're understood. And a good client or a good boss knows that good e-learning can't be created in a day and knows that it takes money and takes time. And they also know how to read and adhere to a contract. I had a situation many years ago where I worked at a company where we cost out a really big project for NASDAQ. It was like $750,000 project, and it was a multi-year project. And unbeknownst to us, the head of the company, who knew nothing about e-learning because it wasn't an e-learning company, we were just one arm, got a call from from NASDAQ saying, "Hey, we love the proposal you guys sent, but we don't like the assumptions built in there. Can we just strip those out?" And of course, he said, "Sure." Well, next thing you know, without those assumptions, they were able to have as many scope changes as they wanted, and that ended up costing the company, well, the project cost overall was $2.25 million. They ended up losing something like $1.5 million on that project. Why? Because the boss went ahead and took out assumptions without checking with his people, and that was not a good thing. 20 minutes of WBT takes 84 hours to develop. Tressa says with great, as if it's an official number. Yeah, that sounds about right. But it also can be, that can vary quite a bit as well. So, and 1 hour of IELT takes 60 hours to develop, etc. Okay, very good. So, the blunder number 6 is choosing the wrong tools. Now, we've just been talking about tools, right? We've been talking about how different tools do different things. And so you really have to be careful because a tool's price tag is not always the best indicator of the tool either. A tool can cost $300 but end up costing you so much time to develop anything in that tool versus a tool that might cost you $3,000 but it's so fast and easy to use that you're getting things done in no time. So as an example, Articulate Storyline costs retail about $1,795. It's a bit easier to use though than Captivate. Captivate has a lot more features in it. And so as such, it's harder to learn because anytime you have a tool with more features, it's going to take longer to learn. But Captivate can be purchased for $20 a month. So the question then is, do I need all the power of Captivate? If I do, then it's money well spent. If I don't need all the power of Captivate, then I'll use Storyline maybe. But Storyline does cost a lot more. So I mean, the trade-offs are not always there. So you have to be really careful when costing out tools, not to just assume that a higher priced tool is your better tool, or that your lower priced tool is a better tool. It just really depends on what you're trying to get accomplished. Okay, so choosing the right media is number 7. Choosing the wrong media elements is a biggie because I see too much of this going on. If you're teaching accounting, do you really need video? I mean, period. Do you really need video at all? If you're teaching heart surgery, though, yeah, I think video might be pretty important. If you're teaching car engine repair, maybe video is important there. And so again, it's a question of, do you really need to go out and shoot video? I had a situation where we had built a large course for the combat lifesaver role, which is a role inside every Army platoon. It's one person who carries medical supplies. They are not a medic, but their job is to keep wounded soldiers alive long enough for a medic to reach that person, which sometimes can take hours if there are no medics nearby. So it's a question of in that case we had a lot of hours, but there was no video in that course. It was fine. But then what we ended up with was the general who had commissioned the project wanted to introduce the whole course with a video of himself. And we said, okay, fine. And so we had him sit down, and the guy was not very animated, okay? He just wasn't, he was much more, he looked stern, and he didn't really animate much. And we kept trying to encourage him to be a little more animated, but he didn't. And at the end, when we delivered the thing, the Army accused us of having only used a still picture of him. And we said, no, look, his lips are moving. His lips are moving. And they were like, oh yeah. So again, I mean, was that a waste of video? I would say so. We could have done it with just a video still and then audio on top of that. All right, so media elements is a big one too. Budget and schedule must play a part, of course, in choosing your media elements, but it should not be the primary reason. Always be focusing on the learner. Always be focusing on what's going to help the learner best learn. And if it means cutting back on your course because you really have to spend money on video or audio or anything else that you may not have been thinking about earlier, again, better quality than quantity whenever possible. I know it's not easy. I know that there are many times you might be told that, hey, too bad, you just got to get it all done. Just do the best you can. I know. E-learning has a bit of a problem with PR because, in my estimation, about 80% of e-learning is just too boring. It's linear, it is not well done, and as such, we have people who look on us with askance, I tell you, when we tell them that we're working in e-learning. Just they're not real impressed sometimes. But those of us who try really hard to do better work, well, we can be proud. You want to design content that makes sense for your learners as well. So designing it correctly is number 8. You want to make sure there's enough, that you're not crowding too many things on the screen. In this case, this part here, actually they don't normally see until they roll over Ask Your Manager. Then this pops up for them. So it's, again, you try to keep a clean screen. You try to keep people engaged, not just looking at PowerPoint slides, not just reading and looking at pictures or even looking at video. You want to engage them as much as possible. You want to put yourself in the student's seat and ask yourself, what do they need to really get the grasp of the material there. Part of that means that interactivity, of course. Interactivity is so important. This is the level at which you should be attempting to include interactivity. Passive screens and such should be the minimum. Then limited interaction, complex in real time. As much as possible, you want to have learners interacting because that's the way they learn. We don't learn just by reading, we learn by doing. All right, so designing incorrectly also refers to things like if you're having especially to deliver to other cultures, other areas of the world, be careful in the use of gestures. What is normally perfectly fine here may be very offensive in other countries, and what they find totally fine may be very offensive to us. So you want to be careful about gestures you use. You want to be careful about humor as well. Yes, humor can be good, but you don't want to go overboard with humor, and you don't want to do things like play on words if, again, it's not being delivered to a strictly English audience or whatever your primary language is. So emotion is good. Humor can be good, but only in small doses and only when it translates well if you're going across cultures. Also, emotions. Emotions can help a lot to help to relate to characters that are on the screen and so on, but they can also be overused. So be careful about using too much emotion as well. Again, you want to make sure that you're going across the world correctly, and that means the use of religion can also be an issue. I did a lot of work over in Denmark, and guess what? Over in Denmark, they can use a lot of biblical references, like Moses parting the Red Sea and such, in their e-learning, and nobody bats an eye. It's fine with them. It's part of the culture for them. They're not very religious people, and maybe that's why, but it's one of those things where when I first saw it, I thought, really? That's what you want to put in there? Oh, yes, this is what we like. Oh, okay. It wouldn't fly in America probably, but over there it was fine. All right, then number 9 is not letting learners collaborate. Now, more and more, we have fewer and fewer excuses for not letting learners collaborate across in our e-learning. A lot of e-learning now can be done with tools built in, but there's also, of course, all of these other tools, Wiki and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and other elements. Plus, you've got things like Skype and Connect Pro and WebEx and GoToMeeting and Yahoo Messenger and Google Talk. I mean, you've got so many different possibilities there. Let's take a look at this chart right here. This is incredible. This is even a few months old already now, but this is your interactive search market map, meaning that these are all the different search engines that are online that you can use. It's not just Google. It's a lot of other types of search engines too. But here's also the social media one. All of these different social media, of course, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and there's a couple of others that are huge, but there's a bunch of other ones out there too. So why not use those in conjunction with your learning to make sure that people are really getting a full rounded learning experience as much as possible. Listen, you were once a child and you went to school, and what happened then is that you received, in essence, a formal education in school. But that's not really the only way you learned, right? Your parents didn't lock you in school for your whole childhood. In fact, your learning did not come only from school. You ended up learning also from so many other sources, mom and dad and books and TV and friends, sister, grandma, grandpa, magazines, aunt, uncle, touching a hot oven, cousins, uncle, skywriting. Wherever you looked, wherever you did, you were learning. And so in essence, everything was a source of learning, especially when you were growing up. So as such, you might think of all that as your informal education, right? You had your formal and you had your informal. And really, it's what we're talking about is the same thing here. Why even go to school if you've got all these sources for learning? Well, because you need both. You need a formal learning experience, which is your foundational learning, your critical thinking, but then you also need the informal learning as well, which is where you get some of the details, you get experimentation, and you get collaboration. And really, we need both. So as much as possible, you want to let learners collaborate. If your universe is a 21-inch screen, then why not expand your horizons? And in essence, that means that you want to make sure that you're not giving them such a myopic experience that they feel as if they, well, they don't feel anything. They get very little out of it compared to what they can get when they go to a wider expanse, when they're taking into account what others are saying about that subject matter around the world and how they might be able to learn more by collaborating. So when you're talking about the e-learning world, when you're talking about the online world, your formal learning, going to school, informal learning is touching a hot oven, right? But what we're talking about here is e-learning and collaboration, social networking and collaboration. If we were to equate to real life, this is how it would look in the online world. So not letting learners collaborate means also that when we finish a class or we finish an e-learning course, we are not experts yet. You've only graduated. When you finish an e-learning course, you're not suddenly an expert. It takes time to become experts, and it really takes time depending on the content, depending on the learner, depending on how much time is available to that person as well. It could be something that takes a week to become an expert, or it could be 10 years. It really just depends on so many factors, right? We get a lot of help from the guy or the gal in the next cubicle over, and we get manuals. We have online help and more. So eventually, with all of this work, we eventually do become experts, don't we? But as such, if we are not taking into account the social networking sites, the wikis, the blogs, the forums, and so on, then we're not really learning what we need to learn totally. If we're just giving them exactly what we think they need and then we never let them collaborate, it's going to be an issue. The guy or the gal in the next cubicle could really be anywhere in the world now. So realistically, if you're not taking advantage of that, absolutely you want to start thinking about that. Number 10 is not evaluating the results. And this really flies along with what Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And, you know, he was so adamant about that that he actually died because he was put on trial for that, okay, as well. When we're talking about e-learning, we're talking about Kirkpatrick's 4 levels. And these are important because Kirkpatrick established these years and years ago. He's now very elderly, but his family has kept the business going and the process going, and they're all really good speakers. But the idea being that, look, you've got results, meaning, reactions at the very bottom, and this tends to be the biggest one. Reactions are the smiley sheets. They're the things like, okay, hey, did you like this course? Did you feel like it helped you? Was it relevant to you, etc.? But then when you get to level 2, learning, how much did they learn? Maybe you're doing a pre-test and a post-test for this. That's not always the best indicator, but it might be at least helpful because learning at that level is much more important. Number 3 is transfer. How has the learner's behavior changed? Do they have more skills and knowledge, and their attitude is better now as well? And this also helps to address an earlier question. This one's a little hard to assess because it is, in fact, a situation where it takes a lot more effort to judge whether someone has truly learned what they need to learn to the level of transfer when they're not working in a vacuum. They take the course and they still might be asking a lot of questions to the guy or the gal in the next cubicle. They still might be looking up things online. They might be doing a lot of other things. So how do you know for sure whether the e-learning was really the thing that helped them get to this point? Sometimes hard to assess that. Finally, the results, which is business results. This is where you have increased productivity. This is where you have the bottom line is being met, etc. Again, this can be hard to assess. You find everybody doing level 1. Remember, level 1 was your smiley sheets. A lot of people attempt to do level 2 and do a good job with it. 3 and 4, a little bit harder, but can be very important. So, to summarize, our top 10 blunders that I believe are the top 10, skipping steps, starting on the wrong step, not establishing the correct objectives, not estimating the work correctly, choosing the wrong team members, choosing the wrong tools, choosing the wrong media elements, designing incorrectly, not letting learners collaborate, and not evaluating the results.